Deputy Micheál.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, yesterday we had a very frank and honest statement from the head of banking regulation at the Central Bank, Ms. Fianna, who basically outlined what was not being done in relation to the mortgage crisis. We've been raising this on a continual basis now for the last 18 months with the government. And it was confirmed yesterday that half of the 168,000 owner-occupier mortgage holders have no formal arrangement in place. The losses already incurred have not even begun to be cleaned up. And it was revealed for the first time that 48,000 buy-to-let mortgage holders with 13 billion in debt were in financial difficulty, and the banks were berated for not acting on the issue. And indeed, Ms. Muldoon called for an urgency of action. She condemned what she really saw as bankers behaving like unruly teenagers in dealing with the mortgage debt crisis, and said there was a lack of an urgency of purpose in dealing with the mortgage arrears crisis, and that the banks needed to get busy fixing the issue. Now, the Central Bank has been very robust in its comments yesterday, very assertive, far more than you have been in relation to this issue, Taoiseach. And last week I raised this issue in terms of AIB, and you defended Allied Irish Bank in raising its interest rates on standard variable mortgage last week. You actually defended the bank and said you could not intervene. In addition to Fianna Muldoon's comments, we had the Secretary General of the Department of Finance saying very clearly that there would have to involve much more dramatic write-off of debt in respect of households that are really in unsustainable situations and who have an inability to pay. It's the first time, and it took a civil servant to say what government has refused to say in relation to debt forgiveness for the last 2 years. And I think that raises fundamental questions in terms of government policy. What is government policy in relation to debt forgiveness? And the question I have for you, Taoiseach, is a fundamental one. In terms of the Personal Insolvency Bill, you propose that the unruly teenagers would have the veto in relation to mortgage debt and the resolution of household debt. Isn't it time that you had a re-look at that bill and took on board the suggestion that we put forward in our Debt Settlement Office Bill that Deputy McGrath put forward, which would have an independent, objective arbitrator to resolve debt between customers and banks? Because the performance of banks to date, by any yardstick now, can give no one any confidence that they will deal adequately or properly or in a sustainable way with customers and people who are really experiencing pain because of the scale of mortgage arrears that they are in.
Thank you, Deputy. Teacher.
Last week at the Dublin Chamber of Commerce function, said publicly that there was not a demonstrable evidence of a functioning banking system in the country here, and that banks were not doing enough. You're only too well aware, Deputy Martin, that government had to restructure the banks, recapitalise the banks, change the boards, remove the perks, and so on. Government have had regular meetings with the banks through the EMC. The requirement of the regulator for banks to submit to the central bank their forbearance schemes to deal with mortgages and persons in distress cover a whole range of things, from mortgage to lease to mortgage to let, mortgage to rent, and split mortgages and so on. Now, it's a fact, Deputy Martin, that the government would like the banks to sit down and conclude arrangements in every case on a bilateral basis. That facility is there. They've been advised and encouraged and pressurised to do this. I wrote to the regulator last year and advised the regulator that if he needed further powers in acting with the banks, that the government would give him those powers. The regulator replied that he did not at that stage require any further powers. Now, you're incorrect when you say that it was a public servant who first mentioned about debt write-off. The Minister for Justice at the committee stage of the Insolvency Bill actually made this very point. And I note the points of Ms Muldoon. I note the points made by Secretary General Moran. I note the comments from the Governor of the Central Bank. So the message to the banks now, Deputy Martin, is this. And they're in a position to sit down and negotiate on a whole range of areas with persons who have personal debt, who have mortgage distress, who are in arrears and so on. The committee stage of the bill is moving through. This will be completed. The insolvency bill will be in operation by the 1st of March, and it means that if banks do not settle on a bilateral basis with their clients, that those clients will have recourse to a whole new area of having agreement reached in respect of their problem through the insolvency agency, and that allows for debt write-down. So banks have the opportunity. They've been recapitalised. They've been well advised to sit down on a bilateral basis with their clients, and I hope they do that. So what the public servants were saying yesterday follows what the government have been saying for quite some time here. It's time to move now and demonstrate that having the powers that they have, the range of the facilities under the Code of Conduct, the recapitalisation that they have, the capacity to sit down with every individual and work out an individual solution is theirs. And if they don't do that, the insolvency system will kick in on the 1st of March.
Thank you. They are not doing that. That's the point. They are not doing that. I mean, your response is the government would like the banks to sit down. They're not sitting down with their customers. That's what Fianna Muldoon and the head of the banking regulations said clearly yesterday. That's what the Secretary General of the Department of Finance said yesterday. And basically, you wrote last year to the regulator. You note what the head of banking regulation has to say. You note what the Secretary General has to say. We're gone beyond noting, Taoiseach. Do you agree with what they have to say? And doesn't it really call, Taoiseach, for a fundamental change of direction? And fundamentally change the orthodoxy of the approach to banks to date, which is a non-interventionist orthodoxy, which you articulated last week, and you said you could not intervene. Now, given what we're hearing here, the regulator is barking very loudly, Taoiseach, and you are not listening to what is being said. And particularly in the context of personal insolvency, the very people you've just spoken about, you propose to give them the veto in terms of resolving household debt. That is the point. How could you have confidence in the banking leadership, or lack of leadership as articulated by the head of banking regulation? How can you trust in that operation, in that establishment, to actually fairly, objectively and resolutely deal with an issue that is causing immense pain to hundreds of thousands of families across the country?
Thank you, Deputy.
And are making no sustainable effort to deal with it. And as a follow-on, it is causing immense damage to the domestic economy in this country. It is a huge drag on the economy, Taoiseach. It is time for action. It is a time to change the orthodoxy of your approach, which has not worked to date. And it's not, I'm not saying it hasn't worked.
Thank you, Deputy.
The Secretary General of the Department of Finance has said it's not working, and the head of banking regulation.
Thank you.
And I would ask you to look again at the personal insolvency bill and to remove the veto that you propose to give banks in terms of resolving household debt.
Taoiseach.
The banks have been given no veto, Deputy Martin. The committee stage of the insolvency bill was completed in September. As you're aware, the personal insolvency arrangements is a mechanism to arrive at a resolution in every case, in appropriate circumstances, debt forgiveness or debt write-down. Now, as said here, if the banks do not sit down with their clients, if they don't sit down, well, then the client is going to be given by law the opportunity to go through the insolvency arrangements, which, as we know, is a complex piece of legislation, but which will be in operation from the 1st of March next year. I know, and you know, and everybody else knows, the pressure that people are under. Quite a number of mortgages have been restructured or rearranged, but not enough is being done here. And that's why the central bank required the banks to submit to them by September on a timeline basis what they propose to do. Or they better get up and do it now, because the movement is going through the Dáil in respect of the insolvency legislation. That will kick in on the 1st of March. There's no veto in there. And it allows for debt write-down, or for debt forgiveness.
Thank you,
so the banks are forewarned that clients have the opportunity to go through the insolvency arrangements if the banks don't sit down and reach a conclusion. So you're wrong in your assertion.
Thank you.